Wendigos, skinwalkers, horrible creatures that lurk in the night. These beings aren't like other cryptids covered. These creatures come for you. They try to lure you in. Will you be pulled in and be a victim to one of these evil beings? Or will you be able to break free of their spell? Tonight, we're going to look at several skinwalker and wendigo encounters. Enjoy. To start this off, there are zero bear, moose, or elk where I lived at the time. Background info. At the time, I was around 12 or 14, and I was with my friend who I'll call Kayla. We planned on going to a picnic in her pastures. As we walked up a smaller hill, Kayla pushed me to the ground and whispered to me, "Do you see that?" At least 20 or so feet away was a tall creature. It stood on 4 thin limbs and its head was narrow, similar to that of a horse or a deer. It was completely black. I couldn't make out features, but it had a mane just like a lion, but it seemed flat and coarse. The mane, like fur, ran along its back, stopping near the rear. It had no tail. Here's a side note. All of the cattle were moved to a completely different area. Nowhere near this one. No other livestock animals were in those pastures. But this thing was just staring off. Suddenly, my friend stood up and made a beeline for the exit that was at least 2 miles away. I didn't hesitate to follow her. We finally stopped near the latched fence that led to her house and looked back. We had a pretty good view of the hill it stood on. It was slowly walking back into the trees. This still gives me chills to this day. Okay, so Friday, 1:28 a.m. Me and my friends decided to go for a drive. We sometimes like to go to the U.S.A mountains to experience something that only happens in that area, paranormal and supernatural. Like any other time we do this, we go in my car and drive past Home Hill, going towards the mountains and park across from VHS about 1.5 miles away. Then we sit and take in the scenic beauty of the dark desert. Starting by listen closely to anything and looking everywhere, being hyper observant. At first, we saw a light in the distance traveling flat on the desert land, getting within about 1 mile away from us, then disappearing altogether. Moving on from where I had to see something else. Driving through roads and flying by at least 30 miles an hour over the speed limit, we turned down a familiar road. This is where we knew that something was about to change me and everyone else. We all looked to the right side of the car, and we all saw what we believed to be something like a skinwalker. A massive black dog just hunched over at my car while I was going 45 miles an hour through the road. We should have felt impact from the massive creature, but we didn't. Both people in the back seat looked and saw this thing rise up from the ground and stand straight up on 2 legs, absolutely huge and all black with red eyes that are forever imprinted in my mind. I didn't slow down, but sped up, going about 55 miles an hour now, so probably about 20 yards away they saw it rise up, as if nothing happened to it. Before I begin, I'm a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting my family over the summer. We were right outside the DC area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So, my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So, After dinner, we geared up and we headed out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and we take out our binoculars. My mom looks around with them for quite a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and eventually passes them on to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald, anorexic man looking straight at us from behind a tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer, and I train MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes lit up by the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say fuck that and we head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep, and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and I start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter, and I panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs, or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps though, for a while actually, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but I try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up, and then I pass out. My mom wakes me up, and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened and ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is, until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office, and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that was that night. I found two creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or possibly a wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing, no matter how tough I am. To start this story off, and to give a little insight about me, I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. And for heads up in this is a long story, so please bear with me. Now, back to the story. On one particular hot summer weekend, me and a couple of friends, including my boyfriend, let's call him Tony, and my older brother, let's call him Brad, decided we were going to do some camping for the weekend, since it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents had owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But, being stupid teenagers, we didn't really think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teenagers would. Well, after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had brought a ton of alcohol and weed to last us for the weekend, so we wouldn't be bored since we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around 12 a.m. and was pitch black, we had a huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony. As we talked and laughed about coming up events in our lives, we were so distracted that we didn't even notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes to one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all intoxicated and high at the time. Eventually, our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. "Hey dude, you alright?" he asked Brad. Silence. Brad didn't reply or even make any movements that would indicate he heard him. After that, I started to get scared, as well as the other 2 girls there. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first to catch on what he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods. I turned my head and followed his gaze the best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was staring at, my heart dropped. There, right fucking there, was at first look a dog. At least, that's what I thought. It was some person's dog that had wandered off. But then my brain kicked in and I realized there wasn't neighbors for miles. So how could there be a dog? My mind started to race while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak even more. In one motion, this thing stood up tall. And when I say tall, I mean gigantic. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. Everyone has seen it then. How could you not? The other 2 girls and the other boy with us gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was still as hell. No one moved for what seemed like hours. Tony was the first to talk. "No tail," he mumbled. No one heard what he said but Brad. And I swear to you, when I say his eyes widened as big as pan saucers, that freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls had asked. "It has no fucking tail," he hissed at her. My heartbeat stopped. He was right. There was no tail on this thing. Suddenly, my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized that what this thing was exactly. Now, I understand why my brother was basically shitting his pants. This thing was a skinwalker. My instincts kicked in right then and there. But before I could nope the fuck out of there, this thing let off a terrible stench, like rotting meat, before screaming inhuman-like. The sound was enough to scare the hell out of everyone. My brother was the first up out of his chair and started shouting native words out to the creature, and why I told everyone to get the hell inside. No one questioned me when they seen just how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He's never seen me so scared, so he knew it was a bad situation. We all hightailed it into the cabin with my brother in tow, still shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay, while I gave us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off and grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counters and started throwing it at every window and door, all while chanting. Of course, he had everyone freaked out and basically in tears at that moment. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. All of us were still in shock. He grabbed our dad's pistol and had it posted by him for hours. Everyone was entirely too shaken up to even question what happened. We must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up to my brother packing all of our stuff into 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back, and maybe, just maybe, not alone. Before we left, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out young girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up. To this day, we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night, and they never bothered to ask us either. I'm having a hard time remembering the stories told to me by my Navajo family, but when I Skype with them again, I will ask for me. This creepy set of events happened directly to me though, so here goes. My first personal encounter. I know it's lengthy, but hey, skinwalkers, they do require a backstory. It started when my two brothers, who we'll call David and Luke, and Luke's girlfriend, who we will call Sarah, all drove down to the desert to spend some time out in the country. This is reservation land, as it were, so red dirt was everywhere. This was in southern Utah, a majestically beautiful place if you ever get the chance to visit. We had some pistols and decided to go out and target practice. We took our gear and some old targets to a place called Devil's Heartbeat. I had never been, but all three of them were familiar with the area. It was a canyon about 200 or so feet deep. We stayed on one end of the canyon, by the drop-offs, and to our left was the ravine. About 50 feet over, the opposite side of the canyon rose up above us, where some other ruins were. The Navajo may disagree with historians on the Anasazi's origin and departure. According to Navajo legend, they simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind plates, dishes, food, and went into another dimension, or some equivalent. But, whatever the history, the Navajo do not like to wander in the ruins. I never asked why, but figured it had something to do with disrespect, preserving history, etc. As such, none of the others cared a bit about these canyon ruins. They were more interested in shooting pistols. I could see old beds, ladders, and even cave drawings on the cliffs with just my naked eye. And I got this strange fixation on going over there. I'm not Navajo and felt that their rules didn't apply to me. I set down the cliffs without a rope and decided I would climb down, cross the canyon floor, and then climb back up. This was a bad idea for a million reasons, but it was just like some obsession. I can't explain the feeling. It was the magneticism. I wanted to be in those ruins, and it wasn't just a touristy-like curiosity. It felt like I was meant to go there. I kept slipping and kept getting stuck on the rocks. I was so frustrated I almost started crying. Finally, I was deterred by the unmistakable sound of a growl coming from the canyon floor below me. There were trees down there, so I couldn't see what was making the growl, but a mountain lion immediately rose to my mind, and I got my ass back up to the cliffside. I said nothing to the others, and we shot guns for a while. The only other strange occurrence was while Sarah was aiming, things got eerily quiet. We all heard a sound from behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was almost a growl, but then a hoarse laugh, almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area, and there was nothing. Certainly not on the cliff tops where we had heard it anyway. The creepy part was that while David, Sarah, and I all heard it from a close distance, Luke heard the exact same noise, right by his ear. We ended up camping out there to see if anything would happen, and this is when I got completely terrified. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. We had guns though, and were sleeping with no bags or tents, just some blankets under the stars, and a little flare, so I felt safe when we all laid down. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up a few hours later to see everyone else lying with their eyes wide open, listening. The canyon was completely full of noise. The only way to describe it is people banging rocks together. There would be one set, maybe 300 yards away, then another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 yards away. The canyon echoes, so it was hard to tell exactly how many rock smacking rock noises there were going on, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened to this for maybe 10 minutes. No other animal noises. Nothing. Finally, David, who is kind of a hard ass and the least superstitious, shouted, "Shut up!" And everything immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at one another, wide-eyed. It was dead quiet. And then we heard another super weird noise from the ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it kind of sounded like a zebra noise, like these squeaky trills. It got louder, and then the rocks, sticks, whatever they were, started up again. But this was worse, because now other animal noises came. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching. In my opinion, those were the most terrifying. Owls hooting, and through it all, the terrible zebra noises. We said nope, and got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse that fire, pack our blankets, and speed away, and the noises were continuing the entire time. That night, I was obviously pretty shaken up. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat by me and said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit to avoid a lecture about fucking with spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal. It felt like it. I wanted to go there, so why couldn't I? It would have been beautiful. After I told her all about it, I could see that she had a really concerned look on her face. "What is it?" I asked, totally confused, and she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to lure people up. When they get up on the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. The town has a public access kiva, kind of a tourist trap for a little podunk place, but since I didn't see the ruins up close, I went down into the kiva, and I went alone, as of course my superstitious family refused to enter other natives' dwellings. I figured that nothing could push me off a cliff, if I was in a kiva. I was right, but something even worse happened. Fast forward to a few weeks later, I worked a shitty call center in Salt Lake City, third shift. It was my first night alone, and I was feeling jumpy ever since the kiva. My brothers already warned me that I had a skinwalker following me, but of course didn't believe it. I don't smoke, but I followed my coworkers out for smoke breaks because I'm talkative and I like to chat. Tonight, I lurked in the doorway because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out the glass door and being a total weirdo. It hit me then how paranoid I had been. That's what skinwalkers do. They mess with your mind. While I was pacing on the front of the glass doors, I decided that this whole thing was stupid, and I was going to go outside and stand there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filling back in, but I walked out and put my hands in my pockets, looked at the sky, looked at the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something that I will never be able to give a rational or even halfway accountable explanation for. We have like 6 parking lots, In one of the lots, far away from me, maybe 100 feet, I could see something walking. It was a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping and walked like it was tired or hurt. Animal lover me forgot all about skinwalkers, and I started walking toward it, making the "come here, doggy" noises. And then I stopped abruptly. The dog had the body, form of a greyhound, and it was gray, but there was something very, very wrong with it. It had bloody legs and limped, but it walked more like a person would on feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and from, if that makes any sense. When it heard me, it just stopped without turning, something I've never known any dog to do. And finally, it looked over its shoulder at me, and this is the freaky part. This dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were bared like it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was like a whistle growl, noises no regular animals make. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk to me, or was taunting me. Somehow, in the middle of all of this, I realized that it didn't have a tail, and I'd heard from all the Navajo stories that skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Forgetting all logic and rationale, I turned and jetted. I didn't look back until I was back inside the building and had pulled the door shut behind me. And by then, when I looked, of course the thing was gone. When I described this to my brothers, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker, and they went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, them and their apartments. I never saw the creepy, bloody dog again, and I have never even slightly wanted to visit the cliff ruins.